You are listening to The Vocal Technologist. Spoken Tech for your ears.
Right now, in certain corners of the global financial system, artificial intelligence bots actually outnumber human beings 100 to 1.
Yeah, it's wild.
And they aren't just, sitting there making stock recommendations for us anymore. They're holding their own wallets, making their own trades, and executing their own payments completely autonomously. So, welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're looking at a stack of sources from late April 2026, and the picture they paint is intense. We are basically watching the global financial system undergo this violent, rapid evolution.
It really is a structural metamorphosis, honestly. Like, we are seeing crypto infrastructure finally maturing to become the actual backbone for real global transactions. But at the exact same time, it is facing unprecedented, existential pressure testing from every possible angle.
Right.
We're talking state-sponsored hackers, aggressive regulatory crackdowns, and just paradigm-shifting technology all hitting at once.
And that is our exact mission today. So if you felt like the worlds of AI, crypto, and traditional finance are just violently colliding right now, well, you're absolutely right. We're going to connect the dots today between massive decentralized finance hacks, the looming threat of quantum computing, and how everyday traditional finance is aggressively moving onto blockchain rails without most people even noticing it.
Yeah, and to really understand the chaos at the edges, we actually need to start with the silent, massive adoption happening right in the center.
The invisible infrastructure.
Exactly, the invisible infrastructure. Everyday companies, we're talking DoorDash, Stripe, Coastal Bank, ARQ, they are now running stablecoin payments in production.
Wow.
Yeah, and they are using a specific blockchain called Tempo. Stripe is actually using it for cross-border payouts in over 100 countries right now, with the explicit goal of replacing traditional slow banking rails entirely.
Which, that makes sense on a conceptual level, but for years, traditional enterprises have been completely terrified of touching blockchain.
Oh, absolutely terrified.
Because the volatility of native tokens, the unpredictable gas fees,
Yeah.
it was just too much of a headache for a normal business.
Okay.
So what is the actual mechanism that makes Tempo different? Why now?
Well, it comes down to stripping away the speculation, right? Just focusing purely on the utility. Tempo features dollar-denominated fees and sub-second finality.
Meaning it settles instantly.
Right. When a transaction is sent, it settles almost instantly, and the cost is completely predictable. And crucially, there is no native token requirement to use the network.
Wow.
So you don't have to buy some volatile cryptocurrency just to, pay for the computing power to process a standard business transaction.
Okay, so they essentially stripped away the casino aspect to just use the plumbing?
Exactly.
But what about privacy? Because traditionally, blockchains they're public by default. If I'm Coastal Bank, I cannot have my competitors or the public seeing every single transfer my clients make. That's a non-starter.
And that tension right there between verifiable security and institutional privacy, that has been the biggest bottleneck for years. But Tempo solved this through a mechanism they call private zones.
Private zone.
Yeah, so think of these as parallel chains operating alongside the main network. The enterprise operators can see all the transactions in their specific zone for compliance and anti-money laundering purposes.
Right, for the regulators.
Exactly. But the individual users, they only see their own activity. And the broader public, they just get cryptographic proof that the transactions were mathematically valid without ever seeing the raw data or the amounts.
That's fascinating. And the sheer volume flowing through these systems is wild. The sources show Revolut has quietly sustained between $1 billion and $1.8 billion a month in on-chain transfer volume.
It's math.
But, with that kind of volume, regulators are obviously stepping in. I was reading through the UK's Financial Conduct Authority proposals in our stack, and they are pushing for what might be the broadest crypto regulatory regime globally. Unlike the US SEC, the UK is demanding authorization even for non-custodial interfaces before they can serve users.
Yes, and that is a massive, a truly massive philosophical shift in regulation.
Let's pause there for a second. For someone who isn't deep in the crypto plumbing, what does non-custodial interface actually mean in practice?
So simply put, a custodial platform is like a traditional bank. You give them your money, they hold it for you. A non-custodial interface is just a piece of software, like a digital dashboard on your phone, that allows you to interact with the blockchain while you retain total, complete control of your own funds and your private keys.
You hold the money, they just give you the buttons to push.
Right. And historically, regulators only focused on the custodians. By going after the non-custodial interfaces, the UK is basically saying, look, if you provide the window to the blockchain, you need authorization, even if you never physically touch the user's money.
That makes the regulatory net incredibly wide.
Extremely wide.
But here's the paradox that really stood out to me in the data. Early in 2026, venture capital in crypto basically dried up significantly. We're talking 80% of global venture funding, around $242 billion fleeing over to AI. So if the VC money is gone, I have to ask, why is this massive enterprise adoption happening right now?
Well, the VC drought is actually a trailing indicator. It is a sign of maturation. I mean, the speculative capital is always chasing the next shiny object, but the core technology of crypto, it finally works for complex cross-border flows and what we call headless merchants.
Wait, headless merchants? Do you mean software programs operating as businesses without any human employees involved?
Precisely. We are talking about fully automated systems that need to send and receive value without any human intervention. And the venture data suggests that roughly 95% of the traditional financial systems migration to these kinds of automated, invisible rails is actually still ahead of us.
So it's like we're building the plumbing for a massive skyscraper while everyone is totally distracted by the flashy new AI casino next door.
That is the perfect analogy, yes.
But if headless merchants are the future, that brings us right back to that terrifying, fascinating statistic from the beginning of our deep dive. The fastest growing demographic of new financial users isn't human. We are officially entering the era of AI economic actors.
It is a profound shift. Artificial intelligence has transitioned from being a co-pilot, something that helps a human draft an email or code, to being an autonomous economic agent that executes complex tasks entirely on its own.
Right.
And to execute those tasks, it requires its own native financial infrastructure.
Because traditional financial rails completely fail here, right? Like you can't march an AI bot into a Chase branch, hand over a social security number, and open a checking account. Traditional finance is built on human identity and physical addresses.
Exactly. Blockchain, on the other hand, relies entirely on cryptographic keys. It does not care if the entity signing the transaction has a pulse.
It just cares about the math.
Right. It is natively perfectly suited for non-human actors, providing the missing infrastructure for the AI economy. We're talking verifiable identity, governance frameworks, and micropayments.
And we're already seeing this infrastructure light up in the real world. That Stripe and Tempo integration we mentioned earlier, they cleared over 34,000 agent-to-agent transactions in a single week.
Yep.
With fees as low as 0.3 of a cent. And there's another protocol in the sources, by 402. That's processing $1.6 million monthly in entirely agent-driven payments.
It's accelerating so fast.
And I also read about smart contracts being used for what they call credible commitments. Like, if two AI agents are trading, and you're worried one might be trying to honeypot or scam the other, the smart contract acts as this immutable escrow that neither bot can cheat.
Right. It essentially mathematically guarantees the behavior of two potentially untrustworthy artificial entities.
Okay, but practically speaking, and I know you listening are probably thinking this too, giving a bot financial autonomy sounds like a recipe for getting completely drained. If I authorize an AI to manage a portfolio, or just, I don't know, buy computing power, how do we keep these autonomous agents from hallucinating a bad trade and draining our entire life savings? There has to be a guardrail system in place.
It's a very valid fear, and the industry is actively building those guardrails right now through a mechanism called scoped delegation.
SOAP delegation.
Yeah, we are seeing frameworks for this pop up from MetaMask and Coinbase Agent Kit.
How does scope delegation actually function, though? Like mechanically?
Think of it conceptually like giving an employee a corporate credit card. You don't hand the master keys to the company vault, right?
Yeah, obviously not.
You give them a card with a strict $500 limit that can only be used at, say, office supply stores. Scope delegation does exactly this, but at the smart contract level.
Oh, I see.
You don't give the AI your private key. You give it a highly restricted set of permissions. So it can only trade up to a specific dollar amount, or it can only interact with pre-approved protocols. It physically cannot withdraw your core funds.
That is brilliant. Okay, so we could put strict guardrails on our friendly bots. But what happens when malicious actors use AI with absolutely zero restrictions? Because the sources outline an absolute security crisis happening right now in the ecosystem.
Yeah, the structural vulnerabilities of the decentralized finance ecosystem are being ruthlessly exposed right now. To give you a sense of just how dangerous the environment is, DeFi hurdle rates, which is the baseline interest rate required to make an investment even worthwhile, have spiked to between 50 and 60% APR.
Wait, 50 to 60%. That is insane.
Massive.
Investors are demanding those astronomical returns just to justify the extreme underlying risk that the protocol might get hacked tomorrow.
And they have every reason to demand it. Over $600 million was lost in just a 2-week period. Kelp DAO lost $292 million, and Drift Protocol lost $285 million. But what is truly terrifying is how interconnected the damage actually is.
Right, because DeFi is like a house of cards built on interlocking smart contracts. Okay. Like in the Kelp DAO hack, the sources say they used an exploit on the Layer 0 bridge. Can you break down mechanically how a bridge exploit infects a totally different lending platform like an Orv?
Absolutely. So a bridge allows you to move assets from one blockchain to another. The attacker found a flaw in the Layer 0 bridge's code, allowing them to basically mint or steal assets out of thin air.
Counterfeit money, essentially.
Right, counterfeit crypto.
Yeah.
They then took those stolen assets, walked over to eOlv, which is a massive decentralized lending platform, and deposited them as collateral. Yeah. They then borrowed real, hard assets against that fake collateral and just vanished. When the dust settled, Akov was left holding the bag, exposed to $230 million in potential bad debt.
And these aren't just, script kiddies guessing passwords in their basements anymore. These attacks are heavily linked to North Korean state-sponsored hackers. A report from the Ketman Project found 100 operatives deeply embedded across 53 different Web3 projects.
It's terrifying.
It's like an incredibly patient digital inside man operation. They use AI-powered social engineering to build human trust over months. They pass interviews, they contribute real code, they wait, and then they execute a multi-million-dollar drain in minutes.
It is a devastating combination of advanced technology and human manipulation. But as severe as this AI hacking threat is, there is actually an even larger existential shadow looming over the entire cryptographic world.
The quantum threat.
Yes.
I was reading the Google Quantum AI research in our stack.
Yeah.
And the timeline it projected genuinely gave me chills. How fast are we actually talking here?
Yeah. Well, they are projecting that a computer with 500,000 physical qubits could derive a private key from an exposed public key in about 9 minutes.
9 minutes.
9 minutes. That puts roughly 6.9 million Bitcoin at theoretical immediate risk.
And it isn't just about individual wallets, right? Like, Coinbase's advisory board on quantum computing identified that proof-of-stake consensus mechanisms, literally the very heart of how networks like Ethereum and Solana agree on the truth, are fundamentally vulnerable.
Yes.
The signature schemes they use, like Ethereum's BLS and Solana's ED 25510, are not currently quantum resistant. So are we talking about a Y2K situation here where we just issue a software patch and everyone moves on? Or is this a literal ticking time bomb for crypto?
It leans much, much more toward a monumental engineering crisis. I mean, patching a single wallet app is easy, but fundamentally redesigning the core consensus mechanism of a live global blockchain like Ethereum, while hundreds of billions of dollars are actively flowing through it, is incredibly dangerous.
It sounds impossible.
Imagine trying to change the complex lock system on a massive bank vault door, but you have to do it while millions of customers are actively walking in and out of the vault every single second, and they can't notice the change. It requires multi-year fundamental redesigns.
And we are seeing networks scramble to figure this out right now. Ripple has laid out a roadmap to make the XRP ledger quantum resistant by 2028 using native key rotation. Over in Bitcoin, they're looking at a soft fork called BIP 361 to allow proactive migration to quantum-safe outputs.
Right.
But Charles Hoskinson warned that this is actually a disguised hard fork. What exactly does a hard fork mean in this context, and why is it so dangerous?
So a hard fork is a permanent divergence in a blockchain's history. It's when the software is upgraded in a way that is not backward compatible at all. Everyone has to agree to move to the new rules. The danger here is that if they implement a hard fork to protect against quantum computers, the new rules might strand the old, vulnerable wallets. Hoskinson's warning is that this could leave 1.7 million legacy Bitcoin coins, where people have lost their original seed phrases and can never migrate them to the new secure standard, completely unrecoverable forever.
Wow. It is a brutal triage situation. But here's what really fascinates me. We have a system plagued by AI hackers and a ticking quantum clock. Yet the human appetite for risk hasn't decreased one bit. It's just found a new, highly controversial outlet.
Oh, the prediction markets.
Exactly. People are taking this exact same blockchain infrastructure and using it to bet on the future, which is causing a massive regulatory war.
The growth in prediction markets is staggering. In 2025 alone, they generated $51 billion in volume, and traditional finance is heavily moving in. Kalshi secured a margin license from the NFA to allow institutional participation, and ICE, the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange, committed $2 billion to Polymarket.
But the underlying architecture of these markets is actually deeply flawed, isn't it?
Yeah.
The liquidity is highly fragmented. The data showed that the top 5% of skilled traders captured $228 million in wealth transferred directly away from uninformed takers.
Yeah, the retail guys got crushed.
And it all stems from what the sources call the problem with CLO buys, central limit order books. How does an order book mechanically fail here?
So an order book is the traditional way stock markets work. It requires market makers, professionals with deep pockets who provide liquidity by always being willing to buy or sell at a given price.
By a middleman.
Exactly. On Kalshi, just 3 top market makers supply 70% of all the liquidity for election contracts. Because these professionals only want to risk capital on high-volume mainstream events, 85 to 90% of all prediction market volume is locked strictly to politics and sports.
Which is pretty limiting.
Extremely. If you want to create a niche market predicting, say, a scientific breakthrough or a pop culture event, the order book fails because no professional market maker will show up to provide liquidity.
Which is why we are seeing new tech fixes launch, specifically AMM-style infrastructure automated market makers. There's a toolkit called SDK.Markets launching on the Basazol network. And Basazol is boasting 5,000 transactions per second and one-day multi-proof withdrawals. How does an AMM solve the liquidity problem without Wall Street professionals?
An automated market maker replaces the professional human with a mathematical curve. When the very first participant comes in to make a prediction, their capital essentially bootstraps the liquidity pool.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the smart contract then algorithmically adjusts the price for the next participant based purely on supply and demand. It allows developers to spin up custom, fast, parimutuel markets for group chats, fantasy leagues, or live events instantly, without needing a centralized market maker to seed the market.
But as this technology rapidly iterates and makes these markets totally frictionless, the regulatory environment is fiercely pushing back. New York Attorney General Letitia James is actively suing Coinbase Financial Markets and Gemini Titan. And to be clear to you listening, we are strictly impartially reporting the facts of the filings here, not endorsing a side.
Right.
The AG is alleging that these platforms operated prediction markets without licenses from the New York State Gaming Commission, and the suits are seeking disgorgement of profits, restitution, and an under-21 ban. If these markets are proving to be highly accurate data sources, why is the New York AG choosing this exact moment to crack down?
It is a massive clash of fundamental definitions, honestly. On one side, technologists and financial institutions argue that prediction markets are innovative financial hedging instruments. They view them as valuable truth-seeking tools that aggregate human knowledge.
But regulators see the mechanics entirely differently.
Exactly. To a state regulator applying existing statutory definitions, if a user is wagering money on the outcome of a future event, that constitutes unauthorized gambling. Regardless of how elegant the underlying smart contracts are, or whether it uses an AMM or a CLO, regulators argue these mechanics require strict gaming oversight and licensing to protect consumers from systemic risk.
It is a battle over who gets to define the future of financial products. And while prediction markets face intense regulatory heat, the broader crypto market is seeing massive institutional inflows.
Huge inflows.
But the way those inflows are structured is driving some deeply unsettling shifts in how wealth is actually distributed. Let's look at the macro markets.
Yeah, from a macro perspective, Bitcoin recently topped $78,000. We saw $1.4 billion in weekly institutional inflows, partially catalyzed by geopolitical events like the Trump-Iran ceasefire extension strategy.
Right, and MicroStrategy bought another massive chunk, pushing their total holdings over 815,000 Bitcoin. Traditional access is expanding too, with GSR launching the Bizioso Basket ETF on NASDAQ that actively manages Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana.
But the friction of this integration is a nightmare for compliance. Kraken had to file 56 million tax forms for the 2025 tax year.
56 million.
Yes, and 18.5 million of those forms were for transactions under a single dollar.
That is just absurd overhead. But amidst all that compliance noise, there was one concept in the sources that absolutely blew my mind. They call it the art of exit liquidity. If you are listening to this right now and you have a standard index fund in your retirement account or your 401k, this next part directly impacts your life savings.
It is arguably the most crucial dynamic for any retail investor to understand about how modern market structure actually functions today.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics. The sources describe a new dynamic where traditional TradFi passive funds are mechanically forced to buy newly listed companies at IPOs. Walk me through how this mechanically forces a passive 401k to buy at the exact worst time.
Well, let's say a massive tech company stays private for a decade, reaching $1 trillion valuation. All the wealth creation during that time goes to early venture capitalists and insiders.
Right, the retail investor gets none of that upside.
Exactly. When they finally IPO, only a tiny fraction of their total shares are made available to the public. However, if an index rule weights them at, say, 5 times that public float, every single passive index fund, which includes millions of everyday 401ks, is mathematically forced to aggressively buy the stock to ensure their fund matches the index's new weighting.
And this forced buying happens exactly when the early insiders' lockup periods expire, right?
Yes. The passive funds create massive artificial retail demand at the exact moment early insiders are legally allowed to sell their massive private holdings.
Wow.
The mechanics were actually pioneered by crypto foundations, who would wrap locked token allocations in equity vehicles to access traditional brokerages. Now, the San Francisco venture capital complex is scaling that exact template for traditional tech IPOs.
Wait, so let me get this straight. You're telling me that traditional 401k index funds are basically being engineered to play the role of the uninformed retail trader buying the top. So the everyday person's retirement fund is mechanically engineered to be the exit liquidity for early insiders. The public markets aren't venues for value creation anymore. They are distribution mechanisms to offload inventory onto uninformed mechanical buyers.
It's a grim reality.
That is incredibly sobering. And honestly, it makes total sense why we are seeing a parallel rise in extreme privacy tools. The sources noted that crypto-to-fiat off-ramps are getting highly sophisticated to avoid this heavily engineered traditional system. Platforms like Peer are utilizing privacy pools like Monero and Zcash. So when the money finally hits your bank account, the bank only sees a standard Venmo or Cash App transfer from an individual. People are actively paying a premium to sever the paper trail completely.
It all speaks to a financial system under immense fracturing pressure. I mean, people, institutions, and autonomous agents are all searching for different paradigms of transparency, automation, and control.
Well, we have covered an incredible amount of ground today. We started with the invisible infrastructure of everyday enterprises adopting stablecoins, explored the wild new reality of AI bots operating as autonomous economic actors, and peered over the edge at the existential threats of AI hackers and quantum computing.
It's a lot to take in.
We unpack the mechanics and the regulatory war over prediction markets. And finally, look at the grim structural realities of who is really providing the exit liquidity in your 401k. Connecting these dots is how you stay ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. And as we watch all these trends converge, I want to leave you with a final lingering question to ponder on your own. As AI agents rapidly become the primary high-speed participants in our economy, and we are forced to fundamentally migrate to quantum-resistant infrastructure on the fly, we have to ask ourselves, within a decade, will human regulators or even human investors possess the cognitive capacity to understand, let alone govern, the financial system we are building today?
Spoken Tech, for your ears.